Okay, so before we move on, I wanted to bring up something about the flash drive. So the USB flash drive that you receive with the unit has these files on it. And sometimes it's easier just to copy these files onto your laptop. And so you can do that by just selecting them all and click copy. Go to your documents folder and create a new folder and call it whatever. We'll say ecu-gn files. You can name it whatever you want. Double click on it, right click and go down to paste, and it will save them all then onto your laptop, so you don't have to go dig up the flash drive every time you want to reference any of these files. So okay, so now we're going to restart Tuner Studio. When you installed it, there's the icon that appears. We'll start it up, and again, this is the first screen you see, but in the future we don't want to keep seeing this screen. We don't want to have to keep going up to File, opening a project. So you can change that by going to the Preferences under the Options menu and clicking the Load Last Project on Startup. And so we'll close it and I'll show you. Now it should automatically just go to your project, so you don't have to keep digging it out every time, and which it did. So that'll always come up. You don't have to worry about that. As far as loading and saving tunes, so if you want to load up a specific tune, here's the tune that's in that folder, the 50-pound gas tune. You can load it up, and but as far as saving a tune, when you make changes to the tune, Tuner Studio automatically saves those changes. Let me show you here. I'm going to bring up the project file. Tuner Studio Projects. So here's that same 50-pound gas tune. But there's also another file called the current tune, MSQ. Tuner Studio is always making your changes to this current tune. And so this file is constantly updating when you're making changes. So you may lose some of your older changes. So when you're done and you're happy with a tune, it's best to click the Save Tune As and name it something new. Now, Tuner Studio, I have it set up so that it automatically creates a name, which it put the date and the time in there. But you don't have to use that. You can name it whatever. And that way, you can say, best tune ever, and it will always be on there, even though it won't be the best tune because you're going to go back and play with it some more. But anyway, all right, let's talk about another part of loading and saving, and it has to do with if there's differences between files. And the software has a really neat feature called the difference report. What that means is, and I'm going to use an example right now. I'm going to make a change to this file. Let's put this at 80, which you would never do, and close it. And then I'm going to connect to the ECU, which had the previous file on it. All right, I just turned the ECU on. It's going to connect, and it detected the difference because I changed that to 80. So the 80 version was on the laptop, and 45, right, you can see it right here in red, was what was on the ECU. And so when you have a difference in the file between what's on your laptop and what's on the ECU, it brings up what's called the difference report, and it shows you what the difference is. And it's going to give you the option with these buttons down here to send into the ECU whatever you modified. If I wanted to send to the ECU that I changed this to 80, you'd click this button. Or if I want to ignore that and bring whatever's on the ECU back into the laptop, you'd hit this button. And so it's kind of a neat feature to tell you exactly what has changed You can see like where it says next over here, that in previous. If there was many changes, you could page through all the changes and see exactly what was changed. And this, I'm going to exit out of here. This is one of the options. I can't even remember. I think it's right here. Perform difference report on connect. So I have that checked, so it will always do that. If there's no difference, it won't pop up at all. And so that's pretty handy. We can go through some of these items that are up here along the top. I think we went through most of that. There's also a compare tune feature that works like the difference report. If you want to look, if you have a tune already loaded up and you load up another tune, and you can check out all the differences like that. There's an options menu, English, look and feel. This gives the theme kind of a different look. A lot of times I use Nightshade, which is like a dark look to these the menus and the buttons. Navigation, you can change how these if you want these buttons here or if you want menus up here. And a lot of these things you probably don't need to change. But here's where we had the preferences about loading up the last project, doing the difference report. I've got checked to automatically load and save the current tune. We talked about the current tune file, so it automatically is loading that up when you bring in your project, automatically saving it. Restore points. So if this automatically saves your tune when any of these events happen. Closing, connecting, and the restore points, let me see if I can show you where those go. Go back to your project folder, and right here. You can see it's already got some in there, probably from just now us playing around with it. So if you mess up and you have to go back, you can dig those up. Data log naming. When you're doing data logging, I have it set up to automatically automatically name the data log files. And that's handy, so you don't have to worry about typing in something. As soon as you hit stop, and let me go there now. Here's the graphing and logging page. And so if you want to do a data log and you're connected to the ECU, you would go to this tab and just hit start data logging. And then when you hit stop data logging, it will automatically name it for you. Now there's two kinds of data logging. One is on the laptop, and that's, you can start it here, or you can start it here, or you can trigger it, and you can set up a trigger based off almost anything in the ECU, but right now it's set to TPS over 80 if you use it. If you don't want to use it, you can just disable it like that. If the TPS exceeds 80%, it will automatically trigger the laptop logging. And then you can set the bottom up here the same way. Probably the handiest is just set it for time. So basically it would come on when you exceed 80% throttle, and then after 30 seconds goes by, it'll automatically shut off. But you can set it up with another expression just like this also. When you log to the laptop, it logs everything. Everything that the ECU sees, so that you don't have to pick and choose things that you're logging. It logs everything. The other kind of data logging is to the SD card that's inside the ECU. And that's set up here. This is set up, I have it set up by default with a trigger, and it's triggered by RPM when it exceeds 450. Basically that I set it up that way so that as soon as you start the car, it will start data logging no matter what. And so by default, you always have data logs of everything that the car is doing. And it's set to, I have it set to 10-minute intervals. In other words, it'll record for 10 minutes, and when that's done, 10 minutes is done, it starts a new file for 10 minutes. And so it'll be broken down into smaller chunks. It's a little bit easier to download the files that way instead of having an hour-long file. It might take a while to download off the ECU. And so I just leave it at 10 minutes at a time. So, and down here is the list of things that it's going to log. So it doesn't log every single thing when you're logging to the SD card like it does to the laptop. It records certain things that you get to pick out. I've put most of the major things on here, but there are a few more things you could add, from this side. And you would just click what you want, hit a little arrow, and it'll move it over to that side. Now, if you want to look at those logs, so right now because we're not connected, it won't let you look at them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the ECU. Okay, so I turned it on. Obviously, we're back to this difference report. I'm just going to say use controller settings, and then it will restart again. Okay. Now that we're connected, we can go to Browse, Import SD card, and it's showing me what's on the SD card. And these are just from previous logs that have been done while this particular ECU was running. And like I said, I've got it set to record 10 minutes at a time, so each one of these is like a 10-minute chunk. Or if you only had the car running a couple minutes, it'll be shorter. It'll end when you turn the ECU off. Some of these things over here, if you need to reformat the car, if you want to erase everything and reformat it, you can do that. Down here is the real-time clock, which looks like I didn't set in this ECU, so I can click that. There, it set it to today's date and time. And that's pretty much it for that. If the SD card gets full, it is programmed to start over. It'll pick out the oldest file and start overwriting them. So keep an eye on that in case you want to save some old files. But data logging is one of the most important things you can have when you're tuning. It's how we can monitor the tune and make adjustments that are accurate. And I still have this connected right now, so I'm going to start data logging just to show you how this looks. Over on this side, you can pick out what you want it to data log. So when I bring this list down, you can scroll through here, and there's tons and tons of things you can data log. Like AFR, that's a current air fuel ratio. VSS1, that's a signal from the speed sensor, so it would be mile per hour. Spark Advance. You can see there's a lot of things related to Spark that you could record. Here's knock retard. You could set up knock retard. Here's boost PSI. Everything under this. If you choose, if there's nothing, see how these have nothing in them? That means graph 3 and 4 don't show up. But if I were to pick something like AFR1 error, another whole chart will appear. So each chart can only show 4 items with this software. And it will just keep recording across there. If I hit stop data logging, then down here at the bottom there's you can see this line right here. You can scroll back through the entire thing. Over here on the side is basically every reading on the ECU. If I were to scroll through this, you'll see some things changing a little bit. If you wanted to go over here and quickly look and see maybe you didn't have coolant over here, but you quickly wanted to see that coolant was 183 degrees at that particular point in time. But the data logging capability of this is pretty amazing, and what it can do and record. There's another program called Megalog Viewer that you could actually buy that even takes it a step further and has even more features. But for most people, the data logging built into this software works pretty well. And so let's close that up. All right, let me go across the top here a little bit further and see if I can, let's see, we went over some of the data logging. Communications. At the top here is where you can set whether you want to use the USB cable or Wi-Fi. And so right now the FTDI, this is the USB driver. And if I wanted to connect through Wi-Fi, you would change this to the Wi-Fi driver. And the settings that go in here, now these settings are actually on, let me pull up the flash drive right here. And these are instructions on how to set that up. But here's the settings right here, port 23, and here's the IP address. So you would change this to port 23, and the IP address was 192.168.4.1, and then hit accept. Now I found that once you made that change, for me, I found that shutting down Tuner Studio and the ECU, let me close all this, and then restarting it, I'm going to turn the ECU on. Now you need to look at your list of this is actually, if it begins with ESP, that's the ECU. That's a Wi-Fi spot now. And we're going to make it connect automatically. You may need to turn, if you have other connections and they say to connect automatically, I would turn those off because sometimes it's going to try to connect with those if you're trying to get on the internet. And so I'll usually set the ECU to connect automatically. And see, now it's connected. So now we're communicating through Wi-Fi, which is pretty handy, not having to need the cable on there. If you want to change back, you'll have to just reverse what you did. Go back up to communications, go to settings, and let me turn the ECU back off. Change it back to the USB driver. You don't need to change anything else. Just hit accept. And let me restart the ECU and see if it'll connect. Yes, it did. Okay, so now I'm back to USB. The other things on the communication menu you generally won't need to change unless there's some kind of a problem. So I would just leave those alone for now. Up under Tools, there's some thing up here, installing firmware. So from time to time, the firmware inside the ECU may need to be changed, and you can use that feature to help you through that. Channel wizards. If you want to add something special to datalog, or take a couple pieces of data and do a calculation and datalog that, you can do that with these features up here. Now on startup, and this is in the instructions, there's a couple of calibrations you should check. One is calibrating the throttle position, and usually where I have it set is pretty close if you had a stock ECU already, but you can obviously change these. So, and basically how it works is right now if you had the throttle closed right now, you would have the ECU connected, you're in the car with the key on, and the throttle, your foot is off the gas, you would press get current. Basically that means get the current reading of your throttle position sensor. So that changed to 93. That's just a raw computer language decimal number. But anyway, you'd say get current. And then you would push your foot to the floor, and you'll see this blue line go up, and hit get current again, and hit accept. And you can see that went to 0. It was at 0.5. And that'll calibrate the throttle position sensor so the ECU knows what's 0 and what's 100%. Calibrate the map. This is if you are not using the map sensor that's on board. For example, let's say you wired up in like an AEM 3.5 bar. You would open the list, an AEM 3.5 bars on there, or a 5 bar sensor, or if you have a stock GM 3 bar. If you select those, it automatically will calibrate for those, and then you would just hit burn and close. I wouldn't change any of this other stuff. This is the onboard barometric sensor, which is always the MPX 4115, and you don't need to change that. So let's see what else is on the list here. Calibrate battery voltage. You don't need to play with that right now, or the thermistor tables. That basically has to do with calibrating the coolant temperature sensor and the air inlet temperature. I already have these set for what's in the car. You don't really need to change those. Calibrate the AFR table. What that is it tells the ECU what wideband you're using, and the onboard wideband, we used the same type of calibration as for the Innovate LC1. So that if you're using the onboard wideband controller, that's what it should be set to. It mimics that output. Now, if you want to use straight E85, then we change it. We have a custom setting down here, and this is what you would change the numbers to if using straight E85 and you want to read the AFR in E85 numbers. If you have any more questions on that, just let me know. And so let's set this back to where it should be. And I think that covers most of that on that table there. I think that covers about everything that we need to do in this video, and the next one I'll get more into the actual tune settings, but for now this kind of covers kind of the setup part of the thing. So I will talk to you soon.